Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Totally Not Mark, and I really enjoyed his video on Luffy. We got like discussion videos now. He used to do these analysis, like in-depth discussion videos on like Dragon Ball Z characters and that, and I like that he's doing them for the One Piece ones. We had Luffy last week, we got Zoro this week. Let's get into it.
Okay, I gotta be honest, when I first read One Piece, up until that confrontation between Luffy and Usopp in Water 7, I didn't really connect with or understand Zoro as a character. And if put...
I mean, his huge moment's Thriller Bark, isn't it? But
Wished I might have even called him boring.
How dare you?
Now, to put that into perspective, Zoro is introduced to and joins the Straw Hats in Volume 1, Chapter 5, and I didn't start to warm up to him until Volume 35, or Chapter 332. The Z portion of
that's crazy. What? I've always been a fan of Zoro.
Dragon Ball is shorter than that. Initially, I thought Zoro was like many of the early
The Mihawk moment was sick as well. It's like, I will never... I was like,
characters of Dragon Ball, who, because they were introduced early on, lacked the staying power in the story due to their simple personality and character design, eventually being usurped by more complicated and compelling iterations on their initial blueprint. I was dumb, please forgive me, Ona. And now, having taken a closer look, not only can I see that I was hilariously mistaken, but I was in fact ignorant to a character that epitomizes the subtly brilliant writing Oda would later become known for with One Piece. I never noticed it when I was first reading, but I do now. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's more to Zoro than what meets the eye. Here's why.
He's a beast. He's an absolute beast.
1億2000万人に従うような男には見えないが船長の度量が伺えるな
Zoro could be the captain of his own crew.
Definitely, but he believes in Luffy so much that he just doesn't do
This is
that.
something anyone who's seen or read the story of One Piece has no doubt heard on countless occasions through his physical strength and level-headed nature in dire situations. Virtually everyone in the story who encounters Zoro first eventually finds themselves perplexed as to why he isn't the captain of the Straw Hats. And to be honest, it's a rational question to ask. He's serious and very strong, skilled, and, as we've even seen, a natural leader. So, why isn't he? Something that's important to understand about all the Straw Hat Pirates is that they all have a specific goal or dream. Nami wants to map the world's oceans. Sanji wants to find the All Blue. Usopp wants to become a great warrior of the sea. Each of these central characters has an obvious goal, and Zoro is no different. He wants to become the strongest swordsman who ever lived. And just like every other Straw Hat, in order to understand him, we must first understand the origin of his goal. So how did Zoro come to have this
sad backstory
dream? Well, like all the others, it's presented in a flashback. One where Zoro is a young student learning to become a swordsman. A prodigy in his own right, he meets another far greater prodigy in Kuina. And after hundreds of losses to her, including a duel with real swords, he vows with her that one of them will one day become the world's greatest swordsman and will eventually fight each other for that title.
I mean, the reason he starts the three sword style, isn't it, as well? It's like, because so carry on with her sword. And
tragically, Kuina meets an untimely end soon after she's introduced, but not before her and Zoro share this telling interaction.
約束しろよ。いつか必ず俺かお前が世界一の剣豪になるんだ。約束だ。
It's not just for him, it's for her as well.
Did you catch that? It's that last line. That last line that I totally took for granted upon first viewing is vitally important to Zoro's entire character. Promises are something he takes extremely seriously. For instance, if you cast your mind back to when Luffy first encounters Zoro, he's in a bar sticking up for some kid, but we don't see this, or at least not in the manga. So how did Zoro, a notorious and very capable name even this early on in the story, allow himself to be apprehended by someone as incompetent as El Nepo?
I don't need your help. All I have to do is last for a month here, then I'm a free man. Captain Morgan's idiot son promised me.
He made Zoro a promise. This admittedly minor element might not have been obvious to some, and that's for good reason. Oda wrote it to be subtle. Oftentimes in storytelling, a writer will establish a few key elements before emphasizing their worth later on in the tale.
I prefer subtlety because then you actually get to understand the character properly, whereas like if you get them to just be so straightforward, it's kind of like, oh, you're telling me how this person feels. I want to actually get it myself.
The order I just presented the information to you here makes Zoro's valuing of a promise evident because I started my explanation with the key moment in which it became important to him. From there, it's easy to see the instances where honesty and promises matter to Zoro. However, in the actual order of events we see in the story, we see Zoro learn of Helmeppo's lie before seeing how much promises mean to him in the Kuina flashback. It's a remarkably subtle but very effective means of establishing payoff. And this isn't the only part of the story Oda performs this narrative sleight of hand. It can be seen numerous times across the entire series. Take the true nature of Luffy's devil fruit, for example. Fans have known for the longest time that he's eaten the gum-gum fruit, which in turn allowed his body to bend and stretch at will. However, after being pushed to his limits in Wano, Luffy awakened his devil fruit's latent abilities, allowing him to stretch far more than just his own body. The hints were there all throughout the story, but they only really become apparent thanks to this revelation. And on a more modest level, this same technique was used to characterize Zoro here in this instance.
ヘルメッポは初めからあなたとの約束を守る気なんてなかったんだ。だからルフィさんは怒ってヘルメッポを殴ったんです。
This is another occasion where the supporting characters in this story offer Luffy the opportunity to shine as a main character.
Yeah, Luffy, like, he takes in their beliefs, and it's like, how dare you do that to them? That's people like with Nami being betrayed and everything. It's like,
he is designed to fight society's flawed structures. He doesn't care about consequences the same way others do, but what this moment highlights for Zoro is that his life was about to end. His dream was about to end. In the manga, Zoro's flashback with Kuina takes place as the firing squad is taking aim. Moments after the flashback ends, Luffy flies in and protects him. This means that on some level, Zoro now owes both his life and his dream to Luffy.
yeah, if Luffy hadn't stepped in, it'd all be over.
Which makes this next sequence even more interesting.
Mihawk!
Zoro versus Mihawk. This is the first time Zoro gets his shot at becoming the world's greatest swordsman.
And does he fail?
It's easily the best and most dramatic one-on-one conflict the series had seen up until that point, and perhaps what we would see for quite some time. However, something that will become a running trend with Zoro is how each and every one of his key moments in this series can be tied back to that first encounter with Luffy.
世界一の剣豪海賊王の仲間ならそれくらいなってもらわないと困
Hell
る
yeah, he would.
The fight between Mihawk and Zoro is flush with all the trappings of what makes fights in One Piece so entertaining. There's an emotional through line, and in this case, a sense of respect not being handed over out of charity, but instead it being earned. One has to remember, despite the live-action One Piece removing his introduction entirely, really, Mihawk's entrance into the story is haunting in the manga and the anime, and it's intentionally portrayed to be this way.
He just comes out of nowhere and it's like, oh my god, who is this guy? It's, and then just... Whoa.
This is the moment we realize the
Just like
scope
that.
of the
Very
possible
descriptive.
danger in One Piece's world. And that sudden and very pronounced shift in tone was enough to make even me as a reader hesitate. But Zoro steps up to the plate anyway because, as he said before, the day I decided to be the greatest swordsman, I gave myself up for dead. In One Piece, particularly early on, there was a sense that Luffy and those in his stead were merely children with childish aspirations, that they would have no choice but to turn tail at the first sign of true danger. But here we are, staring down the blade of what is undoubtedly true danger, the first of it in the series, and moments before certain death, after being completely and totally outclassed, Zoro says,
He just turns around.
honor, conviction, and conduct. Despite lacking the requisite strength and skill at this time, these are the qualities the greatest swordsman in the world must possess. Luffy throughout all of this looks concerned for his friend and crew member, but more than that, aware that he needed to do this alone. He was never going to step in or interfere in a matter so important to Zoro, but once the duel was concluded and Mihawk spared him, we get this scene.
世界一の剣豪にくらいならないとお前が困るんだよな。
Once again, this is a narrative sleight of hand speaking to an exchange they shared upon first meeting where Luffy declared his dream and Zoro responded with, "You talk big." This is all to say that to Zoro, words are more than a means of manipulation or coercion. They literally mean something. From the very beginning,
so he takes
established...
it's literally like to take someone's promise as like actual like dead, like that is it. That is like buried in the ground. That is exactly what's happening. Like he must have a thing where like someone says something, that is what they are talking about. That's what they mean. They go in to do it.
The ground rules of their relationship, and he wants Luffy to know that when he said he's going to become the world's greatest swordsman,
he means it.
He meant it.
Yeah.
When he vowed to be part of his crew, he meant it.
Yeah.
And I think that value for someone's word and promises of conviction speaks to how he handles Nami's desertion towards the end of the Baratie arc, how he deals with Robin and Usopp's circumstances later. For Nami, if you skim through their story from their first meeting through to her leaving with the Going Merry, she actively goes out of her way to explain that she's not one of the Straw Hats and, least of all, a pirate. Where Luffy is able to read between the lines and see her for who she really is, to Zoro, she hasn't made any commitment to them. And so, when confronted about whether or not they should retrieve her, he says, Nami hasn't made any promise or done anything to gain Zoro's trust at this point, and his dialogue reflects that. It's wonderfully consistent character writing, but it doesn't stop there.
Oh my god, what a moment.
Luffy vs. Usopp is an extremely pivotal moment in the series and is such for good reason. It's the first moment that the crew has truly been fractured by forces from within. And for Zoro, you could argue he's the most important player in this duel outside of Luffy and Usopp. This is a moment so brilliant that even I on my first pass through the series recognized it as a remarkable feat of dramatic writing. In my last video, I touched on the importance of characters like Zoro in the supporting role and how those in his position, when set alongside the main character, can highlight their strengths and weaknesses. Following the conclusion of their fight, Zoro stands by Luffy and offers him rock-solid support when he was at his weakest, when all of them were at their weakest. However, this was far from the most significant moment for Zoro in this Luffy versus Usopp dynamic. After the fallout of Enies Lobby, right before the crew are about to set sail on another adventure, Usopp returns with his tail tucked between his legs, unable to bring himself to apologize, but desires deeply to return to the crew he loves, trying to play it all off as if it wasn't that big a deal. Luffy by his nature wants to accept him back with open arms, no questions asked, but Zoro makes an important observation here. He needs Usopp to say sorry. He needs to admit what he did was wrong, because to Zoro, by joining this crew, Usopp made a pledge and promise, and by going into business for himself due to his own insecurities, spat in the face of all the others who take this vow to each other very seriously. And none take it more seriously than Zoro does. Remember when I said earlier that Luffy and his crew were often looked at as childish and juvenile by those they encountered early on? Well, Zoro was the first one to look the big bad world in the eyes and live to tell the tale. It isn't a coincidence that he spoke these words at this time. It's just another subtle piece of creative writing that takes this already outstanding and compelling scene to the next level. If there's anything that Zoro epitomizes in this story, it's honor, respect, and legitimacy. And when you look at Usopp's disposition and actions during the Water 7 and closing moments of this scene, you begin to see exactly what Zoro took issue with and why. To Zoro, again, words matter, vows matter. Zoro does care about Usopp, but in this scene, he impresses onto Luffy that if they don't hold themselves to any substantial standard and simply accept Usopp back without any acknowledgement of wrongdoing, then what right do they have to call themselves serious pirates? And you know, he raises a really good point. Having disrupted the order of the crew and what amounted to reasons brought on by his own unaddressed insecurities, Usopp challenged Luffy's position as captain. This had been a running gag since Usopp first joined the crew and was in fact one of the first things he said after accepting this position. This is perfectly in line with Usopp's established character at the time, and plays a significant role in his growth over the course of the entire series. A young kid playing pirate with his friends, learning to become a great warrior of the sea with his crewmates. And in this moment, Zoro forced Usopp and Luffy to grow towards their respective goals.
ルフィ来てたのかゾロ
How very strange. What?
世界政府より特命を下す。麦わらの一味
Oh my god.
その島に残る者たち全員を抹殺せよ。たやすい。
In the closing pages of chapter 483, having finally dispensed of Thriller Bark's Moria, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Luffy is left totally out of commission, drained from
Oh, this is such a freaking cool Zoro moment. This is like peak.
their
This is
encounter.
peak.
Aptly titled, quote, The End of the Dream, this chapter contends with the aftermath of Moria's twisted control over the inhabitants he's enslaved. The title clearly can be seen speaking to this obvious plot element, however, for me there's something a little more poetic going on here with that title.
海賊狩りのゾロ、お前から始めようか。
It's worth mentioning that on a narrative level, Kuma's abilities are intentionally framed as terrifying and monstrous, totally shrouded in mystery. This is to serve and supplement a number of different elements in the story. However, during this encounter, it's to emphasize Zoro's bravery, nerve, and conviction.
喧嘩は勝った加勢はいらねえ
I mentioned that Zoro, like every other Straw Hat, has a dream he's striving towards. At the beginning, I even said and seemed to prove that his goal was in fact to, in the name of his friend and rival Kuina, become the greatest swordsman to have ever lived. But that wasn't exactly right either. While it's true that Zoro's primary dream since he was a kid was this, and he has made enormous efforts to achieve that since, I don't think it's his primary goal any longer, and few places emphasize this fact greater than the end of Thriller Bark. Following the arduous adventure through Thriller Bark, fighting ores and navigating this area, the crew, but particularly Luffy, is physically spent. He gave everything he had, and then some to overcome that monster, and that's when something totally from left field blindsides the entire crew. Kuma. Like Mihawk earlier, this is yet another moment during the crew's natural and slow progression through the Grand Line where the big bad world suddenly shows up to test their mettle.
災難ってもんは畳みかけるように続くのが世の常だ言い訳したらどなたか助けてくれんのか
Like much of what makes One Piece famous, it isn't the artwork, action, or even necessarily the choreography that elevates this scene to the profound level of fame it occupies now in the global zeitgeist. It's Oda's spectacular writing brimming with character, history, and meaning. Zoro is clearly positioned here as the main Straw Hat pirate after Luffy. He doesn't react childishly to Kuma's initial backhanded compliment like everyone else did. He successfully dodges attacks unlike many of the others, and lasts the longest while the others are dispensed of much more easily. But they all do eventually fall nevertheless. Luffy is exposed, now lying there without a soul standing between himself and certain death. All he can do is unconsciously wait for his destiny. The first and only meaningful strike landed on Kuma. A strike that reveals animatronic enhancements came from Zoro. His curiosity is piqued, but there's only one thing on his mind once this happens. Protect Luffy, no matter what.
Get the captain out
Even
of
after
there.
taking all of that damage throughout Thriller Bark, taking on Oars 1v1 for a while, and then taking on Kuma 1v1, Zoro was still the only one to get straight back up after Kuma's big attack. Presented with an offer of taking all of the pain in place of Luffy, who at this point simply couldn't take it, told that he would be in essence offering up his own head in place of his captain's. And even when Sanji pushes him aside to offer up his head instead, Zoro once again takes
Knocks him
matters
out,
into his
man.
own
Like,
hands.
get out the way.
There's an interesting conversation to be had here concerning Zoro's motives to accept this in place of Sanji, and I'm excited to discuss it in more detail in a later video. But in essence, it all boils down to motive. Sanji wanted to do it because he saw less value in himself being alive than his allies. Zoro stood up because he felt like he had to, like he was the only one strong enough to. In this moment, Zoro proves that when Luffy saved him all those hundreds of chapters ago in chapter 5, that every single moment he had after has been a gift, one that's been given to him by Luffy. Zoro, thanks to Luffy, is now free to pursue his own dream again, but since that day, his dream has become second to Luffy's. he is indebted to him forever. Zoro's goal is to ensure that Luffy becomes the king of the pirates. What a wonderful chapter title. The end of the dream. It certainly was for Zoro.
Nothing happened.
約束でルフィは海賊王になる男だ。船長親友との約束があんだ。何もなかった。
In more ways than many might appreciate or grant consideration to, Zoro is, quite possibly and consistently, the single most important asset to Luffy on his journey. The quote, "We aren't children playing pirates," and the subsequent actions that reinforce that sentiment aren't coincidence or pieces of dialogue and action patched into the narrative to make him look cool. These are real, tangible consequences of the very first interaction Luffy and Zoro ever had together. An ongoing development with the Straw Hat Pirates has been that of their growing legitimacy on the world stage, an evolution from inconsequential dreamers to credible threats to the current world order in this story. But it's important to remember that way before their growing fleet was ever in the picture, before Luffy had even toppled his first warlord of the sea, before they had encountered the horrors of this world and even ventured into the Grand Line itself, before Luffy even possessed a crew, it was the belief of one honest, loyal, and incredibly skilled swordsman that became the catalyst that transformed a wannabe pirate with frankly unreasonable aspirations into the one and only captain of the now infamous Straw Hat Pirates. All because he believed in him. Zoro granted Luffy legitimacy in that chapter. He made him, for the very first time, a real captain. No longer a kid playing pirate, and Zoro will ensure that remains reality or die trying. There could never have been anyone else up for consideration as Luffy's one and only first mate.
Hell yeah. Cool video.
Thank you for watching, everybody. There will be more videos dissecting the other Straw Hat Pirates to come in the future. If you want to make sure you see those videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. And if you want to be the first people to see these videos, please consider supporting us on Patreon. It helps greatly. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, guys, and we will see you in the next video.
Brilliant. Cool. I wonder who he'll do next. Maybe Nami. Maybe he does them in order of meeting them. That Luffy meets the Straw Hat crew. Maybe. Don't know, but it's cool to have more One Piece related videos from Mark. But yeah, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, and to be able to watch patron-only reaction videos, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask for. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys all next time.